Hi, my name is Seth Cohen, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer of Forbes and the founder of the Forbes Impact Lab. I'm here today with my friend Todd Komarnicki, the director of Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, and Assassin, a new movie by Angel Studios coming out on November 22nd. Todd, great to be with you today.
It's great to be with you, Seth.
So, Todd, this movie, which I've watched, is really a tour de force of a man whose life is maybe heard of but not understood. Who is Bonhoeffer, and why did this story attract you to direct and really be the one that's gifted to tell this story?
You use the perfect word, which is gifted. This story just tracked me down. It was sort of like the Hound of Heaven. It was a story that I didn't know. I had read The Cost of Discipleship, one of his most famous books, when I was in my early 20s, but I hadn't really thought about Bonhoeffer in the intervening years. I knew that he was on the Mount Rushmore of Christian thinkers and intellectuals, but it wasn't an ongoing impact in my life. So when I encountered the real Bonhoeffer and I saw what he traded in order to fight against Hitler, and how on top of the evil he was, I just was magneted to the man. He is so charismatic. He was funny. He was an athlete. He was cocky. One of my favorite things about Bonhoeffer is that he was cocky. He was so certain.
So a cocky theologian.
Yes. And whatever he turned towards, he did with this sort of brazen confidence. Later in his life, when prison had extracted some different experiences from him, I don't know if he was chastened, but his confidence was less in himself and more in his God. And so that was a deepening of his faith. But I find it very attractive that he was so cocky, because when you're in your 20s and you're a male and you think you are aware of how things work, two things are going on. One, you're totally unaware of how things work, and you need some humbling. And two, without that kind of confidence, you don't get very far across the landscape of your life. It's important to blunder. It's important to get things wrong. If you sit back and nurture a lack of confidence, it tends to create a lack of experience. And lack of experience, of course, leads to lack of travel, lack of understanding of others, and we wind up doing this thing my dad said so brilliantly. We just wind up padding our prejudices. When you are cocky, you go out with your prejudices and you see them shredded in real time. Yeah. So your armor, your certainty, it goes away. And it leads to what I think something that we all need is an earned humility.
For those of the folks listening in that are not familiar with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was a theologian, but he wasn't a church-going theologian, right? Tell me, what was in the beginning, what was his life that gave him this kind of confidence and cockiness that then ultimately through the story you helped tell is encountered in reality?
Well, there's two answers. First of all, there was no such thing as a church-going theologian. In America, we think theology equals church attendance. But it was an intellectual pursuit, and he was a prodigy. He was getting his doctorate as a teenager. He was a very bright guy. He just was drawn towards the study of God. I think that's because God was preparing him to live this extraordinary life and leave a mark. But certainly he didn't know he was headed toward that. One of his mentors, Karl Barth, one of the most famous theologians of all time, again, didn't go to church. They were studying it from afar. This allowed him, when he came to New York to study at Union Theological Seminary, to see that the dryness of an intellectual approach to the promises of Scripture, which are actually anything but dry, they're radical, they're extraordinary. If anybody wants to really be rocked to their core, read the not R-rated Bible, but the NC-17 rated Bible. It's not for kids. It's an extraordinary story. Whether one believes its contents or not, the Bible is extraordinary, that it exists and you want to wrestle with it and engage with it. It's a beautiful thing. The second half of your question, you're going to have to remind me of, because I wanted to say that about his early years.
So he then went out and encountered this world.
Oh, what happened to him? Yeah.
What happened to him that then changed him from that cocky theologian to really an actor on not only the global stage, but at one of the most perilous moments in global history in modern times?
Yeah, I would say the thing that changed Dietrich, and I think if he were here, he would say the same thing, is that he met somebody. He met Jesus. Mm-hmm. He came to Harlem, and he found at the Abyssinian Baptist Church up there, through his best friend, Frank Fisher, who was a black man, a kind of faith, a kind of vibrancy that he didn't think existed. He'd grown up in a homogenous Germany, and a Germany that was recovering from World War I.
Sure.
He lost his older brother, who he adored, in World War I. But he was not surrounded by a group of people that met oppression with joy. This is an extraordinary thing. It's so important to talk about the impact that the black church had, not just in America and for those who attended, but for the world, because of what it imbued to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Adam Clayton Powell was the pastor at Abyssinian, and he was the doorway to what Dietrich would say was real faith. There's a scene in the movie, you know it well, where Powell asks Dietrich in front of a group, "Where were you when you met the Lord?" Mm-hmm. And Dietrich, as smart as he is, says, "Met? I don't know what you mean." That's the gap between an intellectual pursuit and a soul flowering.
You know, I want to dig into how this story is now being shared. It is an Angel Studios film, which has really taken the entertainment world by storm over the last few years with its novel. Tell me how you ended up partnering with Angel Studios for this particular film, and maybe what was attractive to you about their model for telling these kind of stories in a broad, popular and cultural frame.
I had the incredible benefit and gift of being able to make this movie completely independently. A group of investors who loved Bonhoeffer had raised money, a significant amount of money to make a movie, and I was able to make it without interruption or interference. 2 days after we locked picture, finished the mix, we got a call from Angel. And while I was making the movie, Angel was not even a company.
Right.
And it was only while I was in post that Sound of Freedom essentially made them a big company. Mm-hmm. And in the theatrical model, I know they'd been involved with The Chosen, but in terms of getting movies in movie theaters, that happened on the back of Sound of Freedom. So by the time October of 23 came around, I got this call. Okay, who is this? Let me research who they are. And I loved this. My first conversation with Jordan Harmon, he said, "Last night my wife and I watched your movie and we loved it, but that has nothing to do with whether or not we're going to make you an offer. We have this guild, they have a group of people, hundreds of thousands of people now, that watch a movie," and he said, "We go by the numbers. If you hit this number, we're going to make you an offer. If you hit this number, we'll make you a better offer."
That's right. They have a very objective frame using their guild framework.
And we hit the higher number, and they made us a better offer. And I hadn't shown the movie to anybody else. I literally just finished it. I hadn't shown it to any other studios, agencies, nobody. And I looked at the landscape and I said, here's a company that's willing to promise a wide theatrical release in America, 2,000 screens, a wide theatrical release worldwide, and put it in a contract. I wasn't going to find a better deal anywhere else. So I set sail with these guys, and it's been very exciting. You know, when you're with a new company, you see the learning curve happen, and it's a live experience. And because I'm such an old head and I come only from the studio world, it's fascinating. Sometimes I see things and say, "Wow, that's a wall we're going to crash into," and sometimes they say, "Absolutely, that's the plan. We're going to crash into that wall," because they're disruptors.
Yep.
Other times I say, this has worked for me in the past on these big movies, and they listen, and we work together in harmony, in beautiful harmony. So there were some marketing decisions they made that I loved, and as we're probably going to talk about today, some marketing decisions that I didn't agree with.
Sure. So thanks for the opening on that. One thing that has been reported recently is the Bonhoeffer family has written a letter not too long ago about this film, and particularly some of the promotional materials related to this film. Maybe could you speak to what that was and why this letter developed, and then maybe your reaction as a filmmaker and to what's been said about this movie by the Bonhoeffer family that signed on to this letter?
Yeah, the language we use here is really important. It's not about the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was about the marketing of the movie, because the movie stands on its own. The movie does the opposite of what it's been accused of by some people in the news. But the marketing did put a gun in a pacifist's hand. Angel loved it because they were getting great convergence. Mm-hmm. And for people who didn't know Bonhoeffer, it made it look more like a thriller.
And the title says, right, like pastor, spy, assassin. So it definitely leans into that sizzle that attracts an audience that might not be familiar with Bonhoeffer's story.
Sure, and they were able to show us paperwork on here's this exact same poster with no gun, and here's the poster with the gun. And it was unimpeachable. Obviously, people were drawn to that. They didn't know the story. They didn't know the familial stakes or anything like that. So they went in that direction. To Angel's credit, when this letter came out, they were very clear in their statement about what the movie is and what Bonhoeffer really stands for. There's no conflation between the gun and his behavior. And the other thing that got tangled up was a connection to a fear of Christian nationalism. And in Germany, because of what nationalism did, and also how Hitler co-opted the church, there are a lot of open wounds. And they got spooked and tried to get ahead of what they thought was a speeding train. Yeah. The frustration for me as a filmmaker was just that the complaints were never about the movie. Yeah. They were about a poster, and a poster that could be changed. And I would have loved if it had been more of an open dialogue.
So we live in a hyper media, social media environment where the hot takes are the takes that most people read. They in fact, if anything, to go back to what I was saying before, someone could they could Google the Bonhoeffer film. Within a few moments, they'll see about, for example, this letter I mentioned. They'll say there's people criticizing it because where does it fit into Christian nationalism, not Christian. They'll just take a hot take, and then they won't spend any more time even watching the full film, which obviously they should. They may not do more research on who Bonhoeffer was and maybe dig into the story. They're just going to take that poster, that hot take, that that moment of air that they feel strongly against. And how does a storyteller, like how is someone who's making films like this, like you are, counter that in this society? Or are we just stuck with this environment because of the technology that we currently live with and are adapting to?
You want to go door to door, really, as a filmmaker, but you can't. And I would never have wanted to have an author or a painter come up to me and tell me I was wrong about what I reacted to. Mm-hmm. It's okay to react to something, but they have to react to the thing, not the idea about it.
Not the shadow of the thing.
Yeah. That's a great example. A shadow, a silhouette. Like anything can look like a rabbit, but does it ever make it a rabbit? No, it's two fingers, held in front of the light. If you're hungry for rabbit that night, you're going to be pretty disappointed when you find the hand that you can't eat for dinner. Like the thing is the only thing that matters. That sounds very David Mamet. The thing is the thing.
Yeah, the thing is the thing. I like that. Let me ask you a question about you personally. I can tell through this conversation the passion you have, and obviously the way this story has touched you and the way you think about it. But we are at a moment where there is this kind of question of how popular culture is telling sacred narratives to certain communities, how faith and the public square are intersecting. Do you feel like you've had any reaction from your fellow filmmakers that you've leaned into a story that is so deeply grounded in faith, or is this just a great drama of humanity and the rest of the Hollywood and filmmaking core that you associate with get it? But or are some people saying, "Hey, Todd, what's going on over there? What's with all the Jesus talk?"
No, I've been doing Jesus talk since I'm 22. So it's no.
They know who you are.
They know exactly who I am. But here, this is really important. I'm glad you brought this up. I did not make a faith-based film. This is a movie about a man of faith. And there's a huge difference. So I use this as an example. If this movie were about a NASCAR driver, nobody would say it was a NASCAR-based movie. And nobody would say, you know, he keeps saying engine all the time. Does he have to mention steering wheel so much? It's making me uncomfortable. I'm a pedestrian. I don't want to talk about all these cars. Of course not.
Yeah.
So this is a movie about a man of faith whose faith called him to sacrifice his life in order to take down Hitler. If he's not saying Jesus, it's inauthentic. So it happens to be about a man of faith. This is much more like Chariots of Fire or Man for All Seasons. And I said from the beginning, not only am I not making a faith-based movie, but I'm making a movie for people who love movies. Yeah. Because this used to be, 15 years ago, a studio movie. Elegantly made, shot and designed by the best professionals, gorgeously acted, and a compelling true story. Those don't exist very much in the cinema anymore, and that's why I'm so grateful for Angel, because they actually are committed to getting quality work out there for an underserved and forgotten audience.
The Forbes audience obviously is very engaged around entrepreneurial capitalism, around creating and building value. It reminds me of a lot of Bonhoeffer's life, which is, as we talked about before, stacking lessons, being resilient in the face of failure, understanding and questioning one's purpose. If Bonhoeffer was sitting at the table with us right now and speaking about the times we're in, and perhaps the moment we're in as a country in the United States, perhaps even globally in business, what advice is the Bonhoeffer that you've studied and you've told the story of? What would Bonhoeffer say to us right now as entrepreneurs, creators, and community builders?
His focus was always outward. I'm going to quote something from my mother's funeral. I had two extraordinary parents. And someone said this at my mom's funeral, and I don't know if people have heard this before or not, but I'd never heard it. They said of my mother, Mary Grace, who was born on Christmas Day, she never entered a room and said, "Here I am." She always entered a room and said, "There you are." That's what Bonhoeffer's about. He was a man for others. He loved Jesus because Jesus was a man for others. And if you want to grow things you love, whatever garden you water will grow. And if you water the garden of fear, we will have a nation totally crippled by fear. No matter how much power gets acquired by whatever group, it'll lead to terror. But if you water the garden of love, you will see things change. And I want to say this to you teed up the audience about business. I'm an entrepreneur. The scripture that gets misquoted all the time is that money is the root of all evil. This is not the scripture. The scripture is love of money is the root of all evil. You cannot serve both God and money. You will love the one and hate the other. So if money is the reason you do everything, then you will suffer and you will cause suffering. Mm-hmm. But if you are able to use the gift of money in order to make the world a richer place, in order to live generously and heal the broken places, not only will you never stop having enough, but you will be transformed from the inside out. It's how we really fall in love with what we were meant to be. I tell my kids every day, live to give and give to live.
Todd, thank you for sharing this story. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. It's a lot to think about, and it's a timely moment to think about it. Thank you.